Nick Dunn, you're probably the most hated man in America right now. Did you kill your wife, Nick?
Everyone told us and told us marriage is hard work. Not for me and Nick.
Hello, and welcome back to For My Consideration, a bonus series from And the Runner-Up Is, where I take a request from a patron to talk about any movie of their choosing that was nominated for at least one Oscar. And today we are talking about Gone Girl, which was nominated for Best Actress for Rosamund Pike, and nothing else. And this was requested by one of my patrons, Dylan. Thank you for the excellent suggestion, Dylan. And my guest today is a writer and podcaster from Oscar Central, one of the most fun people to follow on film Twitter, especially for any Elvis-related content. Making her debut on the show today, please welcome Kenzie Vanunu.
Hi, thank you for that beautiful intro, Oscar
Yes.
Central and Elvis. I am living life.
Those are your specialties, right?
My specialties.
Yes. Very excited to have you on the show and to be talking about this excellent film. Shall we get started?
Yes, let's. I have so much to say about this movie.
So much, so many different angles, truly, yes. Well, Gone Girl is a psychological thriller based on the novel of the same name by Gillian Flynn. It's about a married couple, Nick and Amy, who moved from New York City to Missouri to take care of Nick's mother, and they eventually become rather resentful of each other, I suppose you could say. And one day, Amy goes missing, and it's suspected that she may have been murdered, and that Nick might be the one responsible. So we see how Nick tries to get to the bottom of what happened alongside his twin sister, Margot. And meanwhile, we have the media that's completely sensationalizing this case and making him out to basically be a murderer. And the whole film just kind of turns on its head at about the midway point with a very juicy twist. So the film was directed by David Fincher and written by Gillian Flynn, adapting her own novel. Stars Ben Affleck as Nick, Rosamund Pike as Amy, Carrie Coon, Neil Patrick Harris, Tyler Perry, Kim Dickens, Emily Ratajkowski, Missy Pyle, Casey Wilson, Scoot McNairy, and Celia Ward. Pretty stacked cast. And Gone Girl made $167 million at the domestic box office, one of the highest grossing films of 2014, and it was nominated for one Oscar. Okay, so Kenzie, let's get right into it. Tell me about your history and your relationship with this movie and how you feel like it's held up in the, 8 years now since it's come out.
I personally had not read the novel until the trailer came out, and then I decided against my worst judgment to read the novel, which I wish I hadn't. I feel like I can't imagine seeing that twist not knowing what was coming, but I was just blown away. I'm a huge David Fincher fan, so that tracks for me that I loved this movie right away. But this movie always felt like one of those, when a movie comes out and it's not only like an Oscar player, but it's like a big general audience kind of movie. I was so excited, and I never anticipated this movie just disintegrating at the Oscars right before our very own eyes. But I loved this movie so much. I think it came out like at the exact right time of when everything with Nancy Grace, which is obviously a huge part of the back half of this movie, was just like blown, like everyone knew who she was, and whether you were engaging in that kind of media, it was affecting the way you consumed media with not only true crime, but just day-to-day news. But I will say, this movie made me like Tyler Perry. I really like him in this movie, which is so bizarre. But I find him very, not comforting, but just like a nice audience life raft kind of character, where you're like, this guy knows something is up but does not know how to go about it, because you wouldn't know how to go about it. But I'm kind of like in the middle of the camp of, I think Rosamund should have won, shouldn't have won. Like, I can go either way. But I do bring up the screenplay snub here
Yeah.
every day of my life.
Hmm.
I cannot imagine someone adapting their own novel in a better way. I think this is one of the best scripts of the 2010s. It blows me away it wasn't nominated. And,
Yeah.
when you asked me to come on, I was like, if this is a screenplay snub, I could talk about till I'm literally in a nursing home. So
And those of us in these Oscar circles probably will be talking about it for decades to
they'll
come.
they'll literally be pulling the plug on me, like, please stop talking about this screenplay, but I won't.
It's true, but I guess it just wasn't as good as American Sniper. So there
Oh
you
my
go.
God.
More on that later. Yeah, so I saw this movie probably opening weekend, I think. I had read the book. I was kind of obsessed with like the whole marketing campaign also in a way that I'm usually not with most films. Like I remember like the Entertainment Weekly cover.
That cover is so good.
It's the best. And when I saw it, I loved it. It was so fun to watch with a crowd, especially for the people who clearly didn't know about the twist. Personally, I was just excited to see how they pulled that off. And I found it to be so well done just on a craft level that I still sort of found that I was along for the ride with the people who hadn't read the book. And I do think that's a huge credit to David Fincher, who I was also obsessed with at that time. Loved Social Network, loved Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, even had a soft spot for Benjamin Button. Like I was very much Fincher Hive in that moment. So,
I love the way that this movie was something, especially since you also read the novel,
mhm,
where her thoughts, I was nervous how they would be
yeah,
perceived, like on screen, but this movie does such a good job at like keeping you in the moment, but also in her thoughts and never feeling like it's showing too much.
mhm,
It holds on to its hand so well, and it's such a great collaboration between a screenwriter and director. I don't know how they did it. I want to know, but I also don't want to know, and I'm begging them to work together again on something.
yes. Yeah, this is one of the best examples, really, in modern film of a director really being the perfect match for adapting, a story from a novel that a lot of people had read. A lot of people had certain expectations in mind, but I think it's very clear that he understood the appeal of the story and all the kind of contradictions of these characters and was also just able to make this film that is very entertaining and completely flies by, even though it's 2.5 hours, but also to touch on a lot of different themes about marriage and relationships, especially between men and women, the media and the way we talk about crime, especially when it involves, a white woman going missing or being presumed dead, and really like the whole true crime genre and the sort of murkiness of all that. So, yeah, there's a lot going on in this film. I'm curious if there's something that you feel like was the main thing that you latched onto that kind of made you kind of fall in love with it.
So originally very into true crime, like as a young kid. Unfortunately, I got my hands on like a Helter Skelter book way too young. But as I've gotten older, I've really like taken this as a relationship movie and not even just between the central characters, but between in-laws, between how your relationship changes with your siblings and your family as you get married and like essentially start your own family. I really now look at it as a really great look into modern marriages, for better or worse. But I like the opening being the same as the ending and just like a completely different look is exactly what I take away from this movie. I think that just how people interact with one another and what little behaviors can be suspicious if you're under a microscope like this. I think it's so impressive, and the chemistry between Ben Affleck and Rosamund Pike just accentuates that so much. But that's personally
Yeah.
how what I grab onto with this movie. But I do really love the way it looks at the way media consumes crime and how audiences consume that. But lately, I look at it as like a marriage relationship kind of film.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And for me, it's also this kind of idea of, public image versus private, and how we sort of play different roles in each other's lives in a way, even if, that version that another person sees in you isn't necessarily the person that you are, if that makes sense. That's the part that I think I really keyed into, and I think still endures, almost a decade after its release here. And I feel like it's only gotten worse with how much sort of like social media has just taken over our lives, and we're always projecting a certain image of ourselves and manipulating how others may see us, and that's really what Amy is sort of using for her own benefit. She's making things appear a certain way. She's talking to her neighbor, calling her a local idiot, how like her problems with her husband, and suggesting that he has a violent temper, and she's staging her own crime scene. She's creating this whole narrative and painting herself as a victim, which, I mean, she is at least a victim of cheating, and who knows how intense their fights actually got. But she's kind of exaggerating it in a way to frame him for something that he didn't do. So there's that element. But yeah, it's also this idea that you can't ever really fully know a person, even like the person who's closest to you in the case of, marriage. And there's just like that certain unknowable quality that can be kind of scary. And what I think is kind of brilliant about her story here is that we don't actually feel like we can truly know either of them, like as an audience. It's the story that we're being told in the first half is Nick is sort of supposed to be our protagonist, but there's all these revelations along the way, like the fact that he has a girlfriend on the side who's like 20 years old, and how he's kind of glib at times. It feels very insincere. And then we're only really getting a glimpse into Amy in that first half. And I think there is a strategic sense of distance that we feel from both of them that sort of is reinforcing those themes. And I think that's also maybe reflected in the performances too.
For sure, I think so. And I think some people find fault with that like they can't connect to either of them.
Right.
But I think that's the point, especially when you look at it as like a story about marriage, and like you were saying, that you really don't know someone, because when they're finally back together at the end, it is so bizarre, the energy, because I do feel like he's a little excited to see her again, even after all of this.
Mm-hmm.
But I think like one of my favorite moments of that is when at the very beginning, before she's even missing, when they're talking about how the previous anniversary she like used it to like show he let like a rose garden die or something. And I'm just like, but I think people don't understand that like that sounds awful out of context and like you talking to your family about it, but for all you know, like it was a joke. Like you'll never know. It's just like you don't really know someone, and you also don't know people the way they communicate with one another, like not even in marriages, but just friendships, whatnot. Like when the rumor goes around about the twins, are they incestuous? And I'm like, you just don't know what it looks like to somebody else. And I just think this movie does such a great job. And it's not only the screenplay, but it's also their performances, which I'm not really a big Ben Affleck fan, but I think he's perfect in this because you like him, but you don't at the same time.
Yeah.
And the fact that he was in prep for Batman, so he's like enormous for no reason,
Yeah, that's
is
true.
one of my favorite parts of this movie. Like when she is detailing when he shoves her, I'm like, he is massive. Like,
Yeah.
even if it was like dramatized in her telling of it, like she is a small person at home with this giant man. Like it's scary, but it just does such a good job at exploring those themes.
Yeah. And I think that casting for both of them is pretty genius, honestly. Obviously, with Ben Affleck having been a bit of tabloid fodder for quite a while, since like the 90s, you feel like he can be that kind of guy who has become those like objects of fascination for these true crime, like very much making him into be the white husband villain character, like, that's very much him to a T, and he plays into that very well. And with Rosamund Pike is just, I'm endlessly fascinated with her because just from reading, like, David Fincher liked the fact that Rosamund was an only child, just like Amy, and that she has a specific energy that he just knew right off the bat that she was an only child.
It's so funny because you can tell when you meet people and then they confirm they're an
Yeah.
only child and it makes sense. But like for him to like pick up on that and use it as part of the reason is just so funny to me. It's
Yeah.
so David Fincher.
Exactly. But he also said there's like an opacity to her acting style where he doesn't exactly know what she's drawing on a lot of the time, which was very appealing to him as someone who, genuinely has a understanding by now of how actors tick to a certain degree and like what certain actors are capable of. But with her, he was just like, I don't know where you're drawing this energy from, and that is fascinating to me. So that's part of why she was cast.
We love that, and we love that it wasn't Reese Witherspoon.
Yes, actually, let's talk about that briefly. How do we think that would have gone if this was Reese? Because it originally was.
So I'm not in the camp that it would have been the worst movie ever. I just don't think it would have been as edgy. I do know she's capable of something dark. I just don't think this dark to the point where there are moments where this movie is funny, but it's still this horrible dark undertone, and I don't think that would have come through. It would have just been not awkward, just not, it wouldn't have landed as strong.
Yeah.
And I think that Rosamund has like this really deep understanding of, some of it is like in bad taste, but that's the point. And I feel like with Reese, it may have just been like, not gross, just not as entertaining. It would have been harder to consume, I think. But I don't know. I don't think it would have been terrible. I don't think we would be talking about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I would agree. And I think also just the first half of it, the fact that, the Amy character is in so little of the film, really only in flashbacks, I feel like maybe would have, if it was Reese there, people would have had a certain expectation that she was going to do more stuff later on, and that would have maybe spoiled a little bit of the twist that ends up happening, because I don't think anyone really had that much baggage or any understanding really of Rosamund Pike before this movie, right?
Yeah, I think that's a huge component too, is that she was so like generally unknown to most of us that we didn't know what was going to happen. But with Reese, you would have been like, there's something coming.
Exactly. Brilliant casting, I'd say, on both of those ends. And really the whole cast, I think, is very cleverly cast. This was one of my first viewings of Carrie Coon, obviously. This came out the same year as The Leftovers. It's really started a lifelong obsession with Carrie Coon, who I think she's perfect in this. Like you said, Tyler Perry, phenomenal in a way that I also can't say that I felt in the past. Personally, I always have a soft spot for Kim Dickens.
I love her in this movie so much.
Yes. She has the accent work too is just right on point. Her loving of the bar name, very meta.
The way she delivers that is so funny, because I'm like, is she being serious, or is she like, right. I never know. Like, she keeps me on my toes as an audience member. Like, I'm there with Ben Affleck, confused about what she's saying.
Yes. And even, Neil Patrick Harris, I think, delivers a certain kind of performance that maybe, I don't know if people had seen that side of him before. So it's just, this is part of why we need like a casting Oscar, because
every person in this movie serves their purpose. Like, Casey Wilson is just extraordinary.
She is like a camp icon in this. Can we talk about it?
It's next level, especially when I was pregnant and I was going to the bathroom a lot. All I could think about was Amy talking about her saying, when your pregnant idiot friend neighbor comes over. I was like, you know what? Even but I love Missy Pyle in this
Yes.
so much. It is hilarious. It is so well done. She was the perfect person for that. And then my man Scoot,
Oh,
he
yes.
is just
One scene wonder there.
yeah,
Yeah.
he is so great. I it was like taken aback when I saw him, and then when I rewatched it this weekend, I was just like, I forget he's in this movie, and then he shows up and delivers this intense moment, and then he's never seen again.
Yeah.
This is the perfect definition of a casting Oscar need, like you
Truly.
said,
Yeah.
because every single person is so well used. And then to all my One Tree Hill fans, Lee Mouth Norris just popping up to say there's a clue with her unmentionables is hilarious, just hilarious. They make you
Yes.
like cops in this movie, which is so bizarre. Like,
Yeah, that's quite a feat. Yeah.
quite a
Yeah, I mean, like even her parents are you sense exactly like the kind of people they are and how they totally,
the
consumed
the
her life.
delivery of our website is findingamy.com.
FindAmazingAmy.com.
I
Just
just
with that
it's
like
so good.
reverent tone. Yes.
It's so good. You know exactly who they are in that
Exactly.
moment. And then when they
Yeah.
have like magazine articles about like Amy as a teen, and they're like, this person stalked her, and she's like, 20 years ago? And she's like, yes, but it was very bad.
Right. To that point, I think in terms of story wise, I think just from the few scenes we get of her parents and whenever she's talking about her childhood, you definitely feel how this person was, shaped and formed and informed by her childhood, and how she was more or less always given what she wanted, even though, her parents' standards were clearly pretty high, and more or less just like took out their feelings on how their perfect daughter should be even more perfect through these amazing Amy books, and what that does to you as a child psychologically. You understand, even just from those brief glimpses, how Amy became the person that she is, more or less.
That scene at the it's like a book release for Amazing Amy's wedding, when they're
Yes.
just walking through essentially like a best of, where she's like, I got cut from volleyball the next year she made varsity. It is the perfect layout of explaining everything without spending too much time on it.
Yeah.
And just that proposal is
Mm.
it is so good. It is so well written. It is so funny. And I feel like it explains their dynamic really well,
Yeah.
in a sense where he brings up, he's like, you're not snobby at this insane event where I feel like she is snobby.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the way that he sees her. And that movie does this so well throughout the entire thing of showing what they see of each other. And we never really know how they actually are, but we always understand how they got to that point, like you were saying. So it's just incredible.
Mm-hmm. And even that sense of her thinking that, even in like the cool girl monologue about how men always have a certain fantasy of what a woman should be, and how like, oh, and she's with like Neil Patrick Harris and saying like she can, have a certain level of discourse with him that she couldn't really have with Nick, because his idea of culture is a reality TV marathon and watching Adam Sandler movies. So it's full of contradictions in that way. She's a wildly complicated character, and it doesn't surprise me at all that there was such a fixation on trying to crack who Amy really is and what she represents. And culturally speaking, looking back at all the headlines of people really praising this character, and then other people really saying, does this set feminism back, and all these different things.
So the cool girl monologue for
Mm-hmm.
me
Yeah.
is obviously, I really love it, and I think it's a really great editing showcase of showing all the steps she goes through while talking about this experience and what she did to her appearance, while essentially doing the exact opposite. But it's not my favorite part of the movie, and I know that like every year the monologue just goes viral again and again, and it's what we always talk about.
Yes.
But I think it's like cinematically in the movie, I really love it. I'm not like everyone on film Twitter that like loves it outside of the movie, but I do love the conversation about like what this character did for feminism, because I feel like that's kind of the point, in a sense where it's the same conversation of like the perfect victim, where as some like as like a case in real life goes on and on and on, the more people find out about a victim or a person in the case, they kind of turn against them. And it's like this movie does that with every single character, not only her, but it's just funny because we only ever talk about it about Amy, when I'm like, that's
Yeah.
literally the point of the character.
Thank you for listening to this preview of For My Consideration, a bonus series from And the Runner-Up Is. If you liked what you heard and want to hear more, please go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup.is and become a patron. Only $3 a month will get you access to bonus episodes and early access to regular episodes. Thank you so much for your consideration.